Greetings, everyone. How y'all doing? It's the 5 o'clock hour. Today, show title is "The Truth Can No Longer Be Denied" with James Cassel. Israelite DNA. He will be presenting a presentation, and afterwards, anyone that's willing to come and speak, we will answer your questions. But until then, I'm your host, Apostle Israel Doctrine of the Israel God, the Mixed Multitude, the church, and Brother James will be coming on just as soon as he opens his mic.
Hey, peace family, how you doing, man? My name is James Cassel.
Peace, James.
Hey, what's up? How you doing, Israel Doctrine, man? I want to give you a shout out and appreciate you for bringing me on. I know the
I'm
Most
good,
High.
but your mic is kind of low, bro.
Okay, hold on. You say my mic low?
Yeah, your mic sort of low.
Let me see if I can turn it up or something.
Maybe you can go on the computer and turn the mic level up and it sound better.
Yeah, I'm trying to now.
So give us a sec, people. Little technical difficulty.
Yeah, usually it sound pretty good. I don't know what's going on now.
It's getting there. It's like another little notch and you'll be good.
Okay. What about now? It sound better now?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
I bet. All right, like I said, man, I wanted to give special thanks out to you. Special thanks to the Most High, man, for bringing us together again. Because you know, this was your platform was the first time I ever stepped on YouTube. Was stepping on your platform. So I want to give a special thanks to you. And yeah,
Well, you welcome, and whenever you get ready to present, please do. I'll put the presentation up if you need it put up.
okay. Let me start sharing my screen real quick. All right, you can see my screen.
Yes, I can.
All right, great. First, I want to give all praise to the Most High, like I said earlier, man, and appreciate it for bringing us together again in order to do this. I got interested in DNA to be honest because I started looking for ways to falsify the claims of the Bible, looking for ways to try to validate if there's any way to try to prove through science, because everybody was big on science back in about a decade ago. They was real big on science, so I was like, is there any way to prove this in a scientific manner? And so I started looking into ancient DNA, looking into the DNA of the modern populations and things like that. And this is the evidence that I end up finding. So ancient Israelite DNA, beyond the lies, because you know what they've been trying to present to us is that the Cohen haplogroup, that's the haplogroup of the Jews. If you don't have the Cohen haplogroup, then you're not a descendant of the ancient Israelites. And I wanted to look in the ancient archaeological record as far as the bodies they dug up and they found to see if that could be true. So first we want to go over what DNA is because some people they not very familiar with it. Uh, so what is a gene? A gene is a segment of DNA that carries instructions of making proteins or functional RNA. Genes are made up of nucleotide bases A, T, C, or G. Those are the codes they use for them. Each person has about 20,000 to 25,000 genes. Not all DNA is part of the gene. Much of it is regulatory or non-coding. That's what they used to call junk DNA. What is the gene locus, or plural for is loci? A locus is a specific fixed position on a chromosome where a gene or genetic marker is located. Imagine the chromosome being like a street, and each gene locus would be like an address for where this allele is. For example, the gene which triggers the male development is located in the specific locus of the Y chromosome, because the Y chromosome is the male reproductive chromosome. What is paternal non-recombination on the Y chromosome? This is important because this is how we, trace ancestry. The Y chromosome is passed from father to son. The majority of the Y chromosome does not recombine with any other chromosome. This is called the non-recombining region of the Y chromosome. Unlike autosomes, chromosomes 1 through 22 that shuffle DNA between maternal and paternal copies, the Y stays mostly intact across generations. That's why the Y chromosome is so powerful for tracing direct paternal lineage. Changes happen only by mutation, making the Y like a slow changing record of paternal ancestry, so you're able to trace each mutation back to common ancestry. So this is how they're able to say that, hey, all E haplogroups go back to some paternal haplogroup E, like E1B1A, E1B, E1B1B. These different haplogroups go back to some E paternal ancestors due to the mutations that's shown on the Y chromosome. What are pseudo-autosomal regions? The Y chromosome and X chromosome share two small regions where recombination does occur during meiosis. They are called the pseudo-autosomal regions 1 and 2, located at the ends of the X and the Y chromosome. They behave like autosomes, which means they do recombine. These regions allow the X and the Y chromosome to pair up separately during the sperm production. Alleles. Right now we're gonna go through pretty much from alleles all the way up to haplogroups, pretty much explaining what these are. Alleles are pretty much the foundation, what everything is built on. An allele is a variant form of a gene at a specific position or locus, as we spoke about just a minute ago, on the chromosome. Every person has 2 alleles per locus, except on the sex chromosome in males. For example, at the gene locus that controls the eye color, you may have a brown allele from your father and a blue allele from your mother. And the alleles are pretty much used, well, they'll say it right here in the next part. The important thing to remember is alleles can be dominant or recessive. We know about dominant and recessive genes, or codominant. The SNPs, or the single nucleotide polymorphism, are common types of allelic variation involved in change at a single pair, which is one of the characters A through G. Genotypes and phenotypes. A genotype is a combination of alleles at a given locus. They pair them up with like AA, AG, GG, and there could be other pairs as well. A phenotype is an observable trait resulting from a genotype. Like the phenotype is pretty much the expression of the gene, right? That's what comes out and you see, like brown eyes, curly hair, dark brown skin. All of these are expressions of genes, and that's what a phenotype is. What's a haplotype is a set of alleles inherited together. A haplotype is a group of alleles or SNPs at multiple loci that are inherited together at the same chromosome from a single parent. Important things to remember from that is that they're found in regions with low recombinations where blocks of DNA are passed down largely unchanged, like we spoke about earlier about the Y chromosome, how you're able to trace the lineage down due to the mutations, due to it staying mostly the same with very few changes. A haplotype block may cover several genes or the non-coding regions. You inherit one haplotype from your mother, which is your X chromosome, and one from your father, which is one from your father, which is your paternal chromosome. Um, Typically, you get a X from your father, an X from your mother, or a Y from your father, and an X from your mother. On the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial, which do not recombine, haplotypes are nearly identical to the entire lineage segment. Haplotype, a genetic population lineage. A haplogroup is a collection of similar haplotypes that share a common ancestor with a specific mutation or set of mutations. These are used to trace ancient lineage and migration. Haplogroups are defined by unique SNP mutations that arose once and were passed down through generations. So these mutations, one man gets the mutation, and he passed down this mutation down to his descendants. So you're able to trace the direct lineage, and as more mutations are combined on top of that, you're able to get a long lineage back to one common ancestor for these males. Haplogroups are nested and hierarchical like a tree. Y chromosome haplogroup R1b, 1A, 1A2, A1A2, which that's my haplogroup, is a sub branch of R1b, or mitochondrial L3F1b is a sub branch of L3 proper, which these are my two haplogroups. Chromosomal genders. Y chromosomes on the paternal line pass from father to son. If the father does not pass a Y chromosome to the daughter, he only passes it to his son. Does not recombine except for a very small pseudo-autosomal regions that they share with the X chromosome. Y chromosome haplogroups track direct paternal lineage, named with letters and numbers, as we mentioned earlier. Like as far as haplogroup E, you got the big paternal haplogroup, which is E. Then you have E1 is descendant, E1B1A, or the other descendant of E1 is E1B1B, and so on, E1B, etc. If your Y chromosome SNP is M2 or M180, you belong to haplogroup E1B1A1A1A1C, the most common Y DNA lineage amongst African Americans, often traced to West and Central Africa. Mitochondrial DNA, or the maternal line, circular DNA molecule in the mitochondria, pass from the mother to all her children, both male and females, but only the daughters pass it on. Also does not recombine. Mitochondrial haplogroups track direct maternal lineage, labeled with letters like L, H, U, and M, and subclades like L3, L3F, or L3F1B1, which is my maternal haplogroup. If your maternal haplogroup has SNPs uh, defining L3, L3F, and L3F1B1, a maternal lineage with deep roots in Africa, particularly in regions of West and Central Africa, and found among many African American maternal lineages. How are they related? Alleles are the basic units, A, T, C, or G, at a specific locus. A haplotype is a group of alleles that tend to be inherited together. A haplogroup is a group of haplotypes that share a common ancestral mutation which form a lineage or show a lineage. Different ways you can use it is genetic genealogy, like tracing your paternal surname or your mitochondria or your maternal lineages, comparing haplogroups in different populations to one another. In anthropology, you can use it for understanding migration patterns, and then from your understanding, you can then map the migration patterns, and also used in medical research because some haplogroups correlate with certain diseases. All right, now we're going to get into some of the research papers. analyzing the Bronze Age and Iron Age Levantine populations, because these are the populations we're talking about during the time of the ancient Israelites. So we want to look at these populations and see if there's anything special about the Israelite population that makes them stand out, or are they just a typical population like any other population found in the Levant. The Bronze Age from 3500 to 1150 BCE was a formative period in the southern Levant, a region that includes present-day Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, the Palestinian Authority, and southwestern Syria. This area, which ended in a large-scale civilization collapse in this region, shaped later periods both demographically and culturally. The following Iron Age, from 1150 to 586 BCE, that's the time of the Israelite kingdom emerging, saw the rise of territorial kingdoms such as biblical Israel, Judah, Ammon, Moab, and Aram of Damascus, as well as the Phoenician city-states. In much of the late Bronze Age, the region was ruled by Imperial Egypt, although in latter phases of the Iron Age it was controlled by Mesopotamian-centered empires like Assyria and Babylon. Archaeological and historical research has documented major changes during the Bronze and Iron Ages, such as the cultural influences of the Northern Caucasus population. Now, this is important. Hold on one second. This is important to point out because the Northern Caucasus population is now being taunted as the go-to population for Israelites, the J marker or the Cohen marker. While this isn't even a Shemitic lineage, this isn't even a lineage that would come from the person that we call Shem. This would actually be a Japhetic lineage because the Caucasus is in Europe. The cultural influence of the Northern Caucasian populations related to the Coriaxis tradition during the early Bronze Age and the effects of the Sea peoples such as the Philistines from the west in the beginning of the Iron Age. The inhabitants of the southern Levant in the Bronze Age are commonly described as Canaanites, that is, residents in the land of Canaan, not actually sons of the biblical Canaan, but people who live in the regions. The term appears in several second millennia BCE sources, such as the Amarna letters, the Alaka, and the Ugaritic tablets, and in biblical texts dating to the 8th and 7th century BCE and later. In the latter, the Canaanites are referred to as pre-Israelite inhabitants of the land. Canaan of the second millennium BCE was organized in a system of city-states where elites ruled over urban hubs, over rural, and in some places pastoral countryside. The material culture of these city-states is relatively uniform, but whether this uniformity extends to their genetic ancestry is unknown. Although genetic ancestry and material culture are unlikely to ever match perfectly, past ancient DNA analysis show that they might sometimes have be strongly associated. In other cases, a direct correspondence between genetics and cultures cannot be established. Here we set out to address three issues. First, we sought to determine the extent of genetic homogeneity, which means how much of the same they are, among the sites associated with Canaanite material culture. Second, we wanted to analyze the data to gain insights into the timing, extent, and origin of the gene flow from the Zagros and the Caucasian-related ancestry to the Bronze Age of Southern Levant. Third, we assessed the extent to which the additional gene flow events have affected the region since that time. So they're pretty much breaking it up into three time periods. You have what's known as the Chalcolithic period. That's what comes before the Bronze Age. Then they're saying that there was this influx from the Zagros Mountain, which is in Iran, right by the Caucasus Mountains, and this Caucasus-related ancestry, which is the J marker or the Cohen haplogroup. To address these questions, we generate genome-wide data for 71 Bronze Age and 2 Iron Age individuals spanning 1,500 years from the Intermediate Bronze Age to the early Iron Age, combined with previously published data on the Bronze Age and Iron Age in the southern Levant. So they're taking DNA from 71 Bronze Age specimens, 2 Iron Age specimens, and they're also using other data they have. The assembled data set of 93 individuals from 9 sites across present day Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon all demonstrate Canaanite material culture. We show that the sampled individuals from the different sites are usually genetically similar, albeit with subtle but in some cases significant differences, especially in residents of the coastal regions of Sidon and Ascalon. Almost all individuals were modeled as a mixture of local earlier Neolithic populations and populations from the northeastern part of the Near East. However, the mixture proportions change over time, revealing demographic dynamics of the southern Levant during the Bronze Age. Finally, we show that the genomes of present-day groups, geographically and historically linked to the Bronze Age Levant, including the great majority of present-day Jewish populations and Levantine Arab-speaking populations, are consistent with having 50% or more of their related ancestries from peoples related to the groups who lived in the Bronze Age Levant and the Chalcolithic Zagros. These present-day groups show ancestries that cannot be modeled by the available ancient DNA data, highlighting the importance of additional major genetic effects on the region since the Bronze Age. What that's pretty much saying is that with all the data that they accumulated, they are showing a consistency with the people that were there during the time of the late Bronze Age all the way till present day. So when a lot of people are saying that a lot of people that are in that region today are new invaders, they're Ottoman Turks, they're this, they're that, that's just incorrect according to the genetic data. According to the genetic data, it's pretty much been a continuity of the people in that region since the Bronze Age. And that's 3,500 plus years ago. So there's been thousands of years of continuity in that region. And this right here comes from a paper known as the Genomic History of the Bronze Age Southern Levant. This was published in Cell Volume 181 by David Reich and Israel Finkelstein. David Reich is a pioneer in the studying of ancient genomes, of digging up ancient bodies and taking DNA samples, analyzing those samples, enriching them, and letting us know what the haplogroups of these people were. And Israel Finkelstein, as many people know, is a biblical minimalist. A biblical minimalist is someone that takes nothing in the Bible as true until they can prove it as true. But he's the authority in pretty much a authority in archaeology in that region. Haplogroup J in the ancient Near East, because again, what I'm showing right now is that haplogroup J is the haplogroup that came into the Levant during the Bronze Age period from Iran region, the Caucasus Mountain region, and that is not plausible that they are the actual haplogroup of Israelites. It's more likely that they descend from the sons of Japheth. And this right here will go into and exemplify that. 3 haplogroups were found at high frequencies in the Mazandarani and Galaki groups. R1, a basal R1, a G M201, and a J2 M172. To further investigate the relationship of these haplogroups based on the 3 SNP groups, we type 9 Y loci in individuals with these Y SNP haplogroups and compare the results of the same from the Y loci on the same Y SNP background groups where type previously in the groups from the Caucasus and Iran, reducing median networks of the Y haplogroups, further indicating the closer relationship of the Mazarani and the Galaki. What they're pretty much showing is that there's a close relationship between these three haplogroups. These three haplogroups are pretty much all Caucasian groups that come from the Caucasus Mountains, which again would be more keenly associated with the sons of Japheth than they would be with the sons of Shem. And if you look at the map over here to the right, at the very top, you see these are the European haplogroups right here across the top. Then if you see down, if you get down to about 14,000, 7,000 years ago, you see that they spread out. And right here in Sacerbilia, Georgia, in the Caucasus Mountains, this is where these haplogroups spread into the Near East from, this region right here. The mitochondria and Y chromosome data giving conflicting views on the relationship of the South Caspian groups. The mitochondrial data suggests that they are most closely related to their geographic and linguistic neighbors, namely other Iranian groups, whereas the Y chromosome data suggests that they are more closely related to the South Caspian groups or the European groups. How can these be reconciled? One possible scenario would be the origin of the Gilaki and Mazarani in the South Caucasus and migrated to the South Caspian region, followed by an incorporation of females but not males from the local Iranian region. So pretty much men came down from the Caucasus Mountains and took women from the local Iranian groups. Such preferential incorporation of females would be expected if the ancestors of the Gilaki and Mazdarani groups were patrilocal, which means the paternal groups move while the women stay in the in the environment. So the men go out, hunt, conquer, move around, hunt, conquer, and set up little locations where they have their women and they come back to. Which in the case which is the case today and would lead to the integration of mitochondrial groups, but not Y groups from the local Iranian gene pools. Over time, the mitochondrial gene pool of the South Caspian groups would come to resemble that of their genomic neighbors, while the Y chromosome gene pool will still reflect the South Caspian origin. So, like I said, the Y chromosome come down. After a while, they're pretty much pushing out the local Y chromosomes, which would have been E, haplogroup E chromosomes, and they're taking over now. And the women, but the women are staying there, so they're taking the local women and having the local women raise their children, and now they're raising these children with the customs, with the local customs, the local languages, so on and so forth. Presumably, the ancestors of the Gilaki and Mazdarani spoke a Caucasian language. Therefore, their original Caucasian language must have been replaced by the local Iranian language under the above scenario. So pretty much this is explaining how haplogroup J got Shemitic languages. Pretty much they came down from the Caucasus Mountains, took local women, had children with the local women. The local women raised the children. The children learned to speak the language of the local women. They learned the customs of the local women because the papa's pretty much a rolling stone. They moving around, going, conquering other regions and stuff like that. And this comes from a paper called Concomitant Replacement of Language and Mitochondrial DNA in the South Caspian populations of Iran. And this is important to know because according to many scholars and a lot of people you're going to find and meet online, they're going to want to promote to you that J haplogroup is the Shemitic haplogroup, is the haplogroup of the Israelites, and should be considered the haplogroup that is descendant of Shem. But according to this paper, it shows and demonstrates that no, the reason J has Shemitic language is because it got it from the females when they came in and pushed out the males, which would have been E carriers, which E is pretty much universally accepted by scholars as the origin of Shemitic languages, where it should have been the E haplogroups. They pushed them out, and now the J haplogroups, the G haplogroups, the R1s, which includes R1A and R1B haplogroups. Now they're speaking Shemitic language or E haplogroup language. Um, Now we're gonna look at again, we're steady analyzing the Bronze Age population, but we're gonna take a more look at the Jewish populations themselves, because this is something that a lot of people don't like to talk about. There are a lot of Jewish groups that are beginning to accept this, acknowledge this, but there are a lot of people, especially amongst Christians for some reason, that don't want to acknowledge this part of Jewish history, don't want to acknowledge that sub-Saharan African populations are part of that ancient Jewish population. And this right here says a striking finding from our study is consistent with the detection of 3 to 5% sub-Saharan African ancestry in the 8 diverse Jewish groups we study: Ashkenazis from Northern Europe, Sephardi's from Italy, Turkey, and Greece, the Mizrahis from Syria, Iran, and Iraq. This pattern has not been detected in previous analysis of mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome data, and although it can be seen when re-examining published results of structure-like analysis of autosomal data. What it's pretty much saying is that when they looking at all of the 8 diverse Jewish population groups, what they're finding in common between these groups, as well as the J haplogroup, the E1B1B haplogroups on the Y chromosome, is that they all share 3 to 5% of autosomal DNA connecting them to sub-Saharan African populations. Even when you look at Y chromosome population of Sephardic Jews and some other Jewish groups, you'll find that they carry E1B1A. Mitochondrial, you'll see they carry some L2, some L3, showing that there is a strong sub-Saharan link and tie. And a lot of people from even the conscious community don't like to accept that, because they see a lot of black people saying that we connected to this book, we connected to these ancient people. Then when the information comes out that shows and proves, wait a minute, there is a connection to it, you know, they want to sit there and say, no, it's the white man book and it's the white man that pushed it on to us. When no, our people had a place in that ancient civilization. And the 3 to 5%, some people say, well, that's not a big deal. Well, you got to understand, you know, autosomal DNA normally hangs around only for like 400 years or so. So if we're finding that consistent 3 to 5%, that means it was at a much, much, much higher percentage the further back we go in history. The higher the percentage must have been. This, let me find where I fell off at. All right, we estimate that the average date for the admixture is 72 generations ago, is the older than that in the Southern Europeans and in other Levantine groups, which showing that, you know, because a lot of those times that we see in the Southern Europeans, we know about the slave trade during the Roman period and the recent slave trade. In Levantine groups, we know about the trans-Saharan slave trades, where the Arabs traded our ancestors across the Sahara, so we know about this. But in the Jewish population is different, because it goes back. They're saying, well, let me read it. The point estimates over all 8 populations are between 1,600 and 3,400 years ago. 3,400 years ago would be the beginning and establishment of the Jewish nation, or the state of the ancient Israelites, as we like to say. The establishment of the Israelite state would have been around 1400 BCE. So going back to the very establishment of the state, we see that they have this sub-Saharan African ancestry. Now, there's many ways you can look at this. You can look at it and say, hey, they picked it up while they were in Egypt. You can look at it and say that, hey, they picked it up when Solomon was doing his trading, but Solomon wasn't trading 1400 BCE. So that makes it hard to say that. So it's either the inception of the nation, which means either the Israelites were sub-Saharan African, or they mixed in deeply with them, like I said, in Egypt. That's your best argument to try to get around the actual Israelites being E1B1A. Because I think that it's most likely either E1B1A or E1B1B. It's one or the other that it would have to most likely be. Um, I think if you're going with the narrative, where the narrative says they were the least population amongst and the least amongst them, and that they did not intermix too much, except the Northern Kingdom, of course, with outsiders, I think that gives sub-Saharan African ancestry a good shot there. Um, it says that, but the largely overlapping conference intervals, it is intriguing that the Mizrahi, Irani, or Iraqi Jews, who are thought to descend at least in part from Jews who were exiled to Babylon about 2,600 years ago, share this signal of African admixture. An important caveat is that there is significant heterogeneity in the dates of the African admixture in the various Jewish groups. A parsimonious, which means pretty much Occam's razor, um, the explanation with the least assumptions, pretty much the parsimonious explanation for these observations is that they reflect a history in which many of the Jewish groups descend from a common ancestral population, which was itself admixed with Africans prior to the beginning of the Jewish diaspora that occurred in the 8th and 6th century BCE. And because they give that prior to the 8th and 6th century BCE, that does leave room for it to be picked up during Solomon's trades. But again, in the Mizrahi Jews, we're talking about is going back as far as 3400 BCE. That's well before Solomon could have traded. So, I mean, the best thing you can say is it was picked up in Egypt. We know they came out of Egypt as a mixed multitude, and everyone that was under Sinai was what had to bow down to the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. And that's just the fact of the matter. Um, Here in this chart, it pretty much shows, if we look at the first one where it talks about African Americans, they show that the West African portion, which is pretty much the sub-Saharan African ancestry they're saying that's found there, is upwards to 79% found in African Americans. When we get down here to the Jewish populations, you'll see it's like 2.8%, 3.2%. To where you get to the Sephardic Jews, you get almost up to 5%, 4.8%, 4.5, 4.9%. So you're nearly at 5% in some of those populations. And what's important is to look at the admixture dates of the generations. As you can see, in right here it says in the Iraqi Jews, it goes back to 153 generations, plus or minus 22. A generation is considered 29 years in the paper, so they're pretty much saying about 30 years. So that's how they're coming up with like 3,400 years ago, which is pretty much 1400 BCE, which is around about the time that you would be establishing the Jewish state. And this is from the paper, The History of African Gene Flow in the Southern Europeans, Levantines, and Jews. When we look at the Sephardic populations and look at what Y chromosome haplogroups are there, they also will show that we have some E1B1A. I'm not going to read all this to you. I'm just going to pretty much go here to the chart, and pretty much you can see here there's E3A. This is from, and I'm going to show a chart that pretty much shows the haplogroups found there later. The genetic legacy of religious diversity and intolerance, paternal lineages of Christian Jews, Muslims in the Iranian Peninsula, right? This pretty much paper shows that throughout the history of Jews, especially when you combine it with the paper I've shown earlier, Jews and their groups that diverge from their teachings, like Christians and Muslims, uh, throughout them you will find the common E1B1B. You'll find the common J haplogroups. You'll find a little bit of E1B1A. In Europe, you'll find a lot of R1B, R1A there, and you'll find a little bit of G as well. But it's pretty much showing that no matter what population we go and look in, we're going to find some E1B1A. We're going to find some L2. We're going to find some L3 there. This is representative of what they would call sub-Saharan populations, which we, as quote unquote African Americans or descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, descend from. Iron Age maritime migration. This is from a paper that pretty much talks about migrations that took place during this time period, what these populations consisted of, what was their genomic makeup, so we can have an understanding of what these ancient populations look like. In the early Iron Age, Phoenician and Greek city-states established trading ports and colonies across the Mediterranean. One such colony, Carthage, originally founded by Tyre, became the capital of the Phoenician Punic territories. Carthage was located in the crossroads of many of the trans-Mediterranean trade routes for 500 years. It was the dominant maritime power of the region until the Roman imperial expansions in the final centuries of BCE. Across the sea, Etruscan city-states flourished in central and northern Italy during the Iron Age. Their material culture suggests continuity with the preceding Villanovian culture, but there is also strong implications of contact with other cultures, both by sea and by land. Pretty much this chart is showing pretty much the time periods. The one we want to really focus on is right here, this yellow arrow right here, that's showing from 1000 BCE all the way down to about 300 BCE. That right there is representative of the sub-Saharan population that we want to focus on. While contemporary scholarship in geopolitics often regards the Mediterranean as a border and silos research along country and continental boundaries, these divisions are modern in their making. This is pretty much saying, modern scholars, or the scholars, especially when we were coming up and looking up and how we were taught, pretty much try to set up these barriers that people didn't cross, that these populations were stagnant and kept into this region. But the more that they're looking into ancient DNA, digging up these ancient bodies, seeing what these populations consisted of, the more they see that people have been moving around in ancient times. I mean, they can't move as fast as they do now. Now, they wasn't much evidence of them just crossing the Atlantic or the Pacific or any of these bigger oceans, but they could move across something like a small Mediterranean Sea, across with boats, and people were migrating all across it. Carthage and the Etruscans were trading partners and at times allies united against Greek and Roman colonial expansion. However, insights into the relationship between the trans-Mediterranean neighbors are limited. Few Punic or Etruscan written sources have survived to the present day, and most of these are short inscriptions. As a result, most of the historical record is filtered through the lens of Greek and Roman sources. Iron Age history was quite literally written by the victors, and archaeogenetic research adds a new line of evidence to our understanding of the people of the dynamic time period. It's pretty much saying all the history we've known so far is all based on Greek and Roman sources. People who hated these populations, who had their own agendas that they were pushing to their own populations, much as we see even today with countries having their agendas they're pushing in order to promote their wars and the domination they're trying to have across the world. This wasn't no different in ancient times, but now, since they're doing the archaeogenetic studies, which is combining archaeology with genetics, they digging up the bodies, Then they're taking the DNA samples from the bodies. We're getting brand new evidence that's showing us that, hey, like I said earlier, people were moving all across this time period. So we can't be trying to sit here and say, hey, well, the Israelites were only there in the land they call Canaan or Israel today, and sub-Saharan populations were stuck below the Sahara Desert. That ain't the way they went, and the evidence is going to come out. Until recently, the genetic makeup of the Iron Age Mediterranean population has been relatively understudied in comparison to earlier cultures. New research has begun to shed light on the Iron Age peoples of central Italy and Sardinia. To date, however, there has been no whole genome ancient DNA research on Northwest Africa from this or adjacent time periods, despite the major historical importance of Carthage and the complex history of the region. Mitochondrial DNA from an Iron Age individual from Carthage is the only existing ancient data from the region. So we carbon dated 19 individuals. These confirm the archaeological attested dates of the use of the Kirkoini necropolis to the mid-Iron Age, that's 650 to 250 BCE, when Carthage was the dominant maritime power. So pretty much after the Assyrians came through, took Tyre and Sidon out of power, Carthage became the new power for trade across the Mediterranean. Carthage is a Phoenician city-state that was pretty much used for trade. They weren't really doing the dominating expansion like the Romans were. They're pretty much more concerned with trade and getting the goods and shipping it back to their own nation. Pretty much a copy of what the Bible said pretty much went down with Tyre and Sidon and Solomon making a deal in order to go out and get these metals from around. Gold, silver, tin, copper, all types of things. In Italy, the individuals from Tarquinian span from Iron Age, from the city's growth in the early Iron Age through its incorporation into the growing Roman Republic in the 3rd century BCE. The burials from Pian Sultano date from the Middle Bronze Age. These are the first available Bronze Age samples from the central Italy with adequate genome coverage and thus provide important context for Italian populations before the Bronze Age. Individuals from Sant'Imbeni, Sardinia, dating to the Bronze Age transition on the island. And what I want to say about these is a lot of these individuals, it also includes RV88, which we find in Cameroon today. We don't find, it's there a bit. We don't find much of it in Europe, but we find it in Cameroon. And if it's coming from Sardinia, that's also showing an example of during the Bronze Age, a population from Europe came into Africa and over time fled deeper and deeper into the interiors of Africa, all the way until they got to Cameroon. So we do have European populations deep in Africa. We identified one close kinship relationship pair, a pair of first-degree relatives from a shared burial in the Bronze Age site. And this right here is important to show this map, because right here where you see the purple, this is all the Phoenician city-state, which you see includes Israel. And when we get to another one that's going to show it, it's going to show the continuity between the haplogroups that are in the DNA genetic composition we're finding in the Phoenician city-states and this region as well. A high number of individuals, let me get to the key part I want to get to. I don't want to hold this here all day. This right here is a map that's important to show, because it shows right here that there's a element of Saharan ancestry that's brought up, that it is a part of Carthage. And this is where some people try to argue that, hey, this is where likely the sub-Saharan African ancestry came from. But again, if the Mizrahi Jews go all the way back to 1400 BCE, we can't try to use 500 BCE 600 BCE as the evidence for this sub-Saharan integration. It was way earlier than that. It says the sub-Saharan African ancestry we observe at Kukoin may uh, e- may result either from direct contact or indirect contact from nomadic populations of the Sahara. These nomadic populations, known to the Greeks as Numidians, are thought to be ancestral to the Amazigh populations living in North Africa today. Trans-Saharan trade routes made easier by a greener, less arid Sahara than today had connected the communities of North Africa with their sub-Saharan counterparts since the Bronze Age. I would actually argue that a lot of the populations that we call sub-Saharan actually migrated from North Africa after the Green Sahara. Um, and the first time we start getting strong evidence for it is when we start seeing evidence for Iron Age populations in sub-Saharan Africa, where they start to make, we start seeing them uh, clear out the rainforest because you need iron in order to do that. You're not going to be doing that with bronze tools clearing out rainforest. They're clearing out the rainforest and they're setting up these farming populations. Herodotus noted the coexistence of sedentary populations and nomadic populations in the land of Labu, which we would associate with Libya, in the 5th century BCE. In addition to overland networks, these connections to sub-Saharan Africa also occurred by sea. Now, this ain't no back alley source. This is a peer-reviewed academic source based on historical and genomic data that is talking about and showing evidence that yes, there's a lot of plausibility to what Herodotus said about the Phoenicians circumnavigating West Africa already, and this would coincide with the stories of Solomon getting a lot of gold from Ophir, which would have been North Africa. Um, Extended far beyond the Mediterranean to the British Isles and to West Africa via the Atlantic coast, and even that a Phoenician or Egyptian expedition had circumnavigated Africa the previous century. The Iron Age may have been a key period of gene flow across the Sahara as well. This is from Genomic History of Continuity and Mobility in the Iron Age Central Mediterranean. Now, this is important because if we're seeing that these populations are moving during that time period, we can't let people try to say, no, your ancestors were just in West Africa. We're finding evidence from 1400 BCE, which is early bronze, late Bronze Age, early Iron Age transition, all the way to around 500, 400 BCE of sub-Saharan African populations being not only part of Levant populations and specifically the Israelite populations, not the Canaanites, but the Israelite populations and the Phoenician North African populations. And that's pretty much all I got on that. I like to open up for any questions you might have. Any questions, the crowd may have. Let me know what you got, Apostle Israel Doctor.
Okay, well, what I will do is put the link out there for anybody out there that would like to come on the show and talk to James. No ignorance allowed. It's disallowed, so don't bring it. But the link will be out there for those who interested in asking questions. My only question is because I talked to Dr. Michael Brown, the Jew for Jesus that debated the Gorilla Hebrew, and he tried to deal with the fact that the Jewish population and the black population, I will use that term, um, had this gene. I think you named the gene. I can't remember the term for it, but he was like, the Jews, the Levites, have this gene. And I was like, don't you know that Esau and Jacob are twin brothers that deals with the male gene pool, which you were speaking about the male and the female gene pool. So if you could speak on it, if you know anything about it.
Okay. Well, I think it's two things there. You have what's known as the Cohen haplogroup. You do have African Americans who carry haplogroup J, the Cohen haplogroup, because there were a lot of intermarriage between Jews, and some Jews had slaves, and you know how that went during the slavery time period. So that would be handed down. Now, I spoke on Jay's haplogroup's origin in the Caucasus region for a reason, because a lot of times that is trying to be promoted to us as if this is the Israelite haplogroup. This haplogroup comes from Shemitic peoples. When no, this is the haplogroup of a people that invaded the land of Canaan during the Bronze Age, which is before the rise of the Israelite state. They invaded the land of Canaan during the Bronze Age and took on like the Hittite Empire, and they took on the label of being Canaanites and stuff like that. So we know the Northern Kingdom did a lot of intermixing with the native peoples of that region, or the peoples that was in that region before Israel came in. So what I think that clearly took place is they intermixed with these people. These people start taking on quote the traditions of the Israelites, start obeying the laws of the Israelites, so on and so forth, and then over time they're gonna keep practicing them while the Israelites are thrown out of the area, scattered. Some of them that are attached to them are scattered as well. Um, but I don't think that that Cohen haplogroup is the haplogroup of Aaron the priest. I don't think it is at all. I think that a only thing happened was that Jewish populations were trying to find a way to substantiate themselves in that region, and they brought up a haplogroup that has been in that region for thousands of years that would support their claim for it, and that was commonly found. But the most likely we looking at it's got to be an E haplogroup, E1B1B or E1B1A would be the haplogroup of the Israelites. As far as the DNA that shared, that sub-Saharan African ancestry that is autosomally shared with the native. I said the native with the Jewish people and with us, which pretty much just means that there was a period of intense admixture, which is why the paper said that during the ancient times before the exile period that they must have all been part of a common ancestral population, which is pretty much that mixed multitude that came out of Egypt.
Sound good. Anybody would like to come and ask the brother some questions? That's the link to get into the room. If not, his presentation is over. So you know what that means. Well, I like that statement that you made because I told him 70 AD, which is a preterist standpoint. In 70 AD, a lot of big things happened in the world. The Levites was taken out, the temple was destroyed, and everything. But you know, Israel was replaced because Israel was taken out the land, and because the Jews was in the land, they start calling themselves Judeans and blah blah blah. You come in.
Yeah, I believe there's a lot of plausibility there. We know what happened during the Maccabees period, where they were taking a lot of people who would have been considered Edomites, mixing them in. A lot of people that probably would have been there since ancient times, and they already had intermixed into Israel. A lot of Canaanites would have intermixed with Israel over time. So a lot of those populations, they've been there forever. Why would they get up and leave just because the Israelites leave? Also, we know that a lot of the people who are considered quote unquote Jewish today, they do mostly descend from Jewish populations that moved into that region around 7th century AD. It doesn't have, I mean, some people argue the Khazar thing. I'm not a big proponent of it. Um, but there was a clear gene flow. I think that it most likely came from escapees from Rome, from us being taken into captivity into Rome. But if you're up there with European people, you're gonna mix with European people. You're gonna look European. The ancient peoples that lived in that time period and in that region, they wouldn't have looked like the people that call themselves Jewish today. Um, but those people do have a claim to that region. There's been continuity in that region, like I said, for thousands of years. Um, but that doesn't necessitate that they are the actual people of the book. And I think that there's no chance at all that haplogroup J was the haplogroup of Aaron. Aaron was said to be from a son of Levi, from Jacob, which was a Shemite, and haplogroup J most likely is a Japhetic Y chromosome that goes back to the sons of Japheth from the Caucasus Mountains, not the sons of Shem from the Near East, which was haplogroup E for sure.
Well, that's as far as my questioning go, and we see nobody has the kahunas to step in the room and talk to you. I'm not even gonna talk to him. But that's it. I appreciate the presentation, your diligence from coming over here, staying out there in the public. I see you don't use the term Hebrew Israelite to try to get them to show them how DNA is, that we are Israel and everything. So I like the presentation, bro.
All right, man. And I want to thank you again. Like I said earlier, man, the first time I ever came on YouTube, ever did anything, was right here on Israel Doctrines channel. He's the one who introduced me to this thing. And I'm always willing to come on if he has a request or anything like that for me to do any type of presentation. I hope the people could understand it, see where I was coming from, to kind of show that, we do have a place there in ancient Israel. Don't let nobody sit here and try to shake your confidence or your faith in that even science can back up and support that. And if y'all want to see more of my work, my YouTube channel is Concrete Biblical Truth. I also got a website called Concrete Biblical Truth. Check me out. And with that, I say peace and shalom.
Peace, bro. We out, y'all.
Throughout history, several historical groups and civilizations have been documented as having connections to ancient Israelite heritage while being of African descent. Here are some notable examples. The Beta Israel, Ethiopian Jews, a Jewish community that lived in Ethiopia for centuries. The Lemba people of southern Africa, who maintain traditions and practices similar to Jewish customs. Various communities in West Africa that have maintained traditions and practices that scholars have linked to ancient Israelite customs. It's important to note that this topic involves complex historical, genetic, and cultural evidence that continues to be studied by scholars and researchers.